Hello there, friends. Welcome to another episode of our weekly Bible study podcast. I think on the last episode, I said we are at episode 5, but we were actually at episode 6. So now we're at episode 7. I'm Scott, First Christian Church lead pastor, joined we're starting off great. This is really good.
Great. Joined by Tommy.
Who are you and what do you do,
Afton
Tommy?
Campus pastor.
Okay, all right.
And I'm Bob, South Green campus pastor.
And last time we started off with favorite cereal. Let's start off this time with our least favorite fast food restaurant. Who wants to go first?
We've conspired together to name Arby's because
Yes.
were our other campus pastor, Tyson, here, it would be his favorite.
Right.
And that was like his first job or one of his jobs.
Right. So we
in high
feel
school.
that we must say Arby's is the least.
We must, because every Wednesday when we all go to lunch, like we do, it's always Arby's that's recommended. And so we're kind
So
of
Tyson, I hope
rebelling
you watch this.
against that.
And we do have a bit of a precedent on our podcast for throwing under the bus the one
That's
of
not
the
here,
four of us
right?
that's not here.
Right. That's,
So we love you, Tyson, but
Yep.
we don't like
So,
Arby's.
There we go. Exodus 20, verses 20 through 26. Who wants to read?
I'll go.
Go.
And the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make yourselves gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones. For if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not exposed on it."
We wouldn't want that.
No.
Alrighty. Context.
So we have God has come down from the mountain in the thick cloud. The people are scared.
Come
They're-
down to the mountain.
To the mountain,
Yes.
that's what I meant. And they're afar off. But Moses goes into that thick cloud. He acts as their mediator. And now we come to verse 22. And in that thick cloud where Moses comes to, God is speaking to Moses.
Yes.
He has just given them the law, the Decalogue, those 10 words. Those are those laws that are for all time.
Moral
Laws that God has inscribed in stone with his hand. And now he's giving Moses, we see a little transition here in our text, and he's giving Moses these different laws for Israel and how they should do things and live. And he starts off with how they should worship. And we see some connection here to those 10 commandments as he's talking about how they shouldn't make gods of silver and gold, things like that.
So it's a repetition of really essentially the first two
Right. Yeah.
commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. And then second commandment, no idols. Cool. You said they stood afar off. Were you quoting an old gospel song that you
They
know in
stood
your head?
far off, is what.
No, it's fine. I thought at that moment I was like, that sounds like an old song to me.
Verse 18 and then verse 21.
Yeah.
Which we learned from the previous sermon.
Yes. So, any other helpful context here? I think also this is kind of a transition
because what's coming after?
passage,
Right.
because of what comes after. And the next few chapters are going to be, so the three categories, we'll call them for now. 3 categories of the law are moral, civil, ceremonial. You just alluded to the moral, which is the 10 commandments, which are true for all time, for all people.
Because they represent the character of God himself. So we talked
Right.
about that as we work through them, how they are a reflection of who he is.
Yeah. And what's coming after this section, at least for a few chapters, will be mostly civil, societal laws, how you deal with one another and people who are not a part of our community.
To become a nation of Israel.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. As a part of forming them into, yeah.
Mhm.
So I think that context and what's coming after, and then even what's coming after that is helpful because there's quite a bit coming up about worship and the forms of worship and how to put together a tabernacle and how to do all that with priests and everything. That's all coming.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think in this section, this little section that we have here in verses 22 and 26,
Yeah.
it's God kind of laying the foundation for what's coming, what you just
Yeah.
referenced.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And then we see here in verse 22 that God, the way he starts his little transition here,
Yeah.
as he does often throughout his communication with his people, he's reminding them of who he is and what he's done.
Yep.
And we talked about this in the last podcast, and we mentioned this a lot, that, God, he says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt. And, we see those kind of phrases throughout his communication with his people.
Like you have seen for yourselves.
And that's what we see here,
Yeah.
He tells Moses to remind the people of Israel, you have seen for yourself that I've talked with you from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a reminder of who God is. He's transcendent. They could not come to him, but he came down to them, and he talked with them from that cloud, from the heavenly area or whatever. And Moses was that mediator. So he's reminding them about this. Before he gets into all these things that we just talked about, he's reminding them once again of his character and who he is.
Yeah. And I've gone back to this a number of times. But in 19, verse 4, right before he starts to say, hey, I'm making a covenant with you in official terms, in 19:4 he says, you yourselves have seen what I did, how I bore you on eagle's wings.
Right.
As you're saying, reminding them. I'm just wondering if there's any relationship between or difference or a progression in thought from 19:4, you yourselves have seen what I did, and then in 2022, you have seen for yourselves that I've talked with you from heaven.
So it moves from his action to his word. Is that what you're?
And it's a little like I was a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire leading you through, right?
Yeah.
And of course, Moses was there the whole time as a mediator, but that is kind of an afar off. It's kind of an afar off thing. But then he comes down to the mountain, and he starts this section by saying, you've seen that I've talked with you. I don't know, it just seems more intimate and personal.
And I think as we go to from 23 through 26, God is referencing or giving criticism to all the pagan worship around them. And here in 22, he's reminding them that he's not like the gods of the pagans. That
Yeah.
he talked to them. He came down to them.
Yeah.
Well, and that's more context, because we say he brought them to the mountain to say, here's why I brought you out of Egypt.
Yeah.
And even in bringing them out of Egypt, the plagues were a demonstration of his superiority
Right.
over the gods that they worshipped there.
Yeah.
And so as he brings them to the mountain, here's why I brought you out.
Yep.
And he's going to and then he's going to clarify the way in which they are to worship, to clarify the way in which they are to live, not like
Right.
the place they came from.
Exactly. And as you both said, he is distinct from the pagan gods.
Right.
And they are to be a distinct people.
Right. And the way that they worship him
Right.
has to be very distinct.
Which I do think is really part of what we're going to dive into in some of these weird things about, like, hewn stones. Are you serious? Nakedness on steps? What's going on here? And
Yeah,
that
so
is
let's...
foreign to us, but it is not to them.
Right.
That is what they would
Exactly.
see in the pagan worship around them.
Yes. So let's get into that 23 and following here. He says, you shall not make gods of silver to be with me. which is an interesting way to say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't make gods of silver to be with me,
Right.
meaning
Right.
as if that's the way that you are with me,
Right.
which is such a cool little phrase.
One commentator said that that phrase there, to be with me, could also be said in addition to me. So bringing them alongside.
Polytheism.
Yeah.
To be alongside me.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yes. I'm sure that's righter than I just said. I said corrected. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold.
But what shall you do?
That's kind of
Yeah.
obvious. But
So
don't
no
make
idols.
Idols.
Right.
But
Right.
you should worship.
And it's not about the silver or the gold per se.
Right.
Later on in the temple, and
Right.
some of the things that go into tabernacle and temple are made from
Yeah.
silver and gold.
Right.
What were you saying? Sorry.
But you should worship
Yes.
an altar of earth, which is going to be different than the altars of stone, pyramid-shaped often, that they would have seen. An altar of earth. And what should you sacrifice there? Sheep and oxen,
Not humans.
not humans.
That's right.
Yeah, and we'll see that scattered throughout the Old Testament. If as you work through the Old Testament, you see that is the way the pagans would worship.
So here is it's a slight stretch, but I think it's there because he emphasizes sheep and oxen. So it's a connection to the commandment, thou shalt not kill, the valuing of life, human life. And when you have worship here, we're valuing human life. God still requires a sacrifice, that atonement, but it's not a human sacrifice. It's a sacrifice of sheep and oxen. So he's setting that tone. He's giving that commandment of how it should be, which is completely opposite from what the rest of the nations are doing. There's all throughout the world, not just in Egypt but all throughout the world. We see reports of human sacrifices and every continent. You see this. This is part of our nature, to satisfy the gods, to appease them by killing human beings.
To take your baby to Moloch and
Yep, and
set
set
it
them on there, and
which we are still doing today.
Yeah.
In our world.
yeah, which shows that the depravity of man never changes. It's always there. It just continues. We can say, "Oh, back in these days, there was good days." This is my little rabbit trail here. Sorry, but
It's a BRT.
it's a BRT. But I think it's a good one because man is depraved no matter what. From the moment that we were created, and when sin entered the world, it's always been depraved. And so here God is saying, "This is how I want to be worshipped," and to have that value of life in there, human life, and said, yes, atonement is necessary, but it's with sheep and oxen. And specific, he made that very specific.
Well, I don't think it's not too much of a rabbit trail in that it does point to, as we said, the moral law is who God is. So why do we value life?
Right.
He's
we
creator.
get that from God.
Right.
Yeah.
On our own, you see, the world does not value human life on its own. It values human life because God has revealed that.
Let me ask a question that may wrap up a few things that we're talking about here related to verse 24. What is the difference between an altar of earth and an altar of stone, which is named later in verse 25?
Yeah, I think it. If I were to just take a stab at it first, I would say that connecting it to the hewn stones, that it's really about what is man fashioned with his hands versus what is God doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think,
Right.
in a sense, it strengthens some of what you're saying, obviously about what God has created is good and right and should be used.
And that God provides all the things necessary
And
for
is enough
worship.
for us.
Right.
So, you can take that even further. I was thinking about that as you were saying, what is God going to provide? What is required in the worship is the sheep and the oxen, and God provides those.
Right.
And so
And
He
it's-
always provides what's needed. I think
and it's
about
the same with
Abraham
the
and
stones.
Isaac, that God always provides that which is needed.
And the stones are there. They're not hewn. They're rough stones, so you can just take those and you build the altar. Whereas
With the stones as they are,
as they are
right?
in the earth, pulling
Right.
them from the earth,
As a part of the
that
natural
God has
processes
provided.
that God's
Right.
created.
Yeah, we don't put it together ourselves with the stones. We don't then fashion and form them. We don't make the steps to go up to God. He
Right.
comes to us. I think it's all just in contrast to the pagan worship
Yeah.
that we do, which is then again a takeout of the don't form idols with your own hands. Don't form or fashion those. So it all does connect.
Pagan worship, maybe another BRT, sorry, but pagan worship.
That's Bob Rabbit Trail for those
Sorry,
of you
Bob
at home,
Rabbit
in
Trail.
case you are new to us.
Pagan worship was all about, here's what I have, and like Cain, he had his vegetables, and he brought that before, and this is what I have. I have my children; they came from me and my family, and I'm offering this to this pagan god. God says, I've provided it all. I think it goes back to what you're saying. When you were saying that, I was thinking this. I've provided all this for you. I've provided the sheep, the oxen, the stones, the earth. I've provided all. And so when you worship me, you're recognizing my provision. And so when
That's already there, that comes
already
from
there.
me.
That's good. The
Well,
Cain and
and-
Abel thing's good.
Well, and I think the
just came out. I gotta write that down.
Yeah, you
I
do.
gotta put that in the sermon.
Okay, guys, let's calm down.
It is good.
Well, there's
Because
a sense
people
of,
struggle with that. Like, why was one offering
Sorry.
satisfactory and not the other? People struggle with that. Like, why does God demand the animal?
oh,
Like,
well, yeah, right.
And you talked about this for a number of weeks about God determining how He's going to be worshipped, and we like to say, "No, I want to worship you the way I want to worship
oh,
you."
absolutely.
And even right here, we're seeing that. I think that's good. I think you're right on, man.
Well, and I think it relates thematically to kind of the main thing here in 22 through 26, which is, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. I will come to you
Right.
and bless you. I am creator. I am provider. It all comes from me. Don't forget that. Worship is about remembering that.
Yep.
So when I bring my sacrifice of veggies, and that's not what was
Pleasing to God.
meant to be
Yeah.
brought,
Right.
which is the problem there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another indication of all that, which he has said at the beginning in 22 to Moses, of course. Say this to Israel. You've seen that I've talked with you from heaven.
Right. It's a constant reminder
Yeah.
of what God has done, how He has provided. And if you're going to worship me, you're going to remember those things. You're going to remember it.
Because you can't if you don't. What
Right.
are you mindful of otherwise?
Only
Like
the
talked
things
about,
you pay
yourself.
attention to.
Right. Yeah.
And we are automatically always paying attention to ourselves.
Yep.
There's, I think, a fundamental sense in
Absolutely.
which every human is fundamentally self-centered in a way that is
Yep.
hard to describe accurately.
Yeah.
And worship is a remembrance. It's a paying attention to over and over and over again the truth of what you just said. God provides. He's there.
Right.
He's the one who has acted beforehand. I think you were saying something about that before.
Yeah. We see this humility in worship. You know, you got the earth and the rough stones. You're not building this giant structure to go up to God. It's just basic. It's just very basic. I wrote in my notes that, and I think some commentators kind of alluded to this too, that it's worship is not glitz and glamour. It's simply what God wants, and it's a recognition of who He is and who we are. That we should approach God in humbleness. We're humbly coming to Him because He's made that way possible for us. It's not something that we've done, and we're not trying to show off our abilities and, you know, with the hewn stones and all these things. It's or our wealth, you know, with the gold and the silver, making it, you know, into, you know, other gods to maybe influence us to go and make other gods. You know, we can say, oh, look at all the gold and silver that God's given me. I'm rich, and so I'm going to make these into my own God. You know, it's a humble acknowledgement of who He is, and coming to Him based on His terms and how He has it set up. So.
And the essential part of that is the humility piece,
Right.
and not even really the hewn stones issue.
Right. Yeah.
Because later on,
Exactly.
it says hewn stones are how you make some of this for me
That's
in
what
worship.
David brought the best stone crafters there were to
Yes.
build the
And Solomon
temple.
built all that stuff.
And it was all very Whoa.
But then when
grand.
Solomon dedicated the temple with all that,
Yeah.
he said, God, you did all this.
Yeah.
You brought all these. And so even in the midst of all that, the heart was humbly coming before God and acknowledging his provision, who he is, his holiness. And I think even in today's world, people are approaching worship in a way that's very self-centered, and goes back to what you were saying. That's in us. That's what we're longing for. Something that can stir that self-centeredness in us to make us feel like, hey, I've done something worshipful, but really, we've made it all about us and not about God.
Let's talk about, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. What is he saying here?
Yeah, I've been chewing on that for a little while. I even think it could be a good title to this sermon as we're developing it. By the time this is recorded, we'll have that in place, hopefully. But I think God is saying that he wants his name to be known. He wants his glory to be known. And the way he's going to do it is I like the word he says, I will come to you. And it goes a tad bit similar to what Moses told the people in verse 20. So do not fear, for God has come to test you.
Right.
And so I like that phrase, I will come to you. So God, how is his glory going to be known? How will he be remembered? He is the one that's going to come to you, to us.
He already has.
He already has.
And he will.
So he's promising this.
As what happens in worship, because he's led them out of, Egypt, and he's come to the mountain, and he says, I will come to you and bless you in every place where I cause my name to be remembered as like the place of worship. When that happens, I will come to you and bless you and be in your presence.
Yeah, that's what some commentators have said, that he's referring to, that he's that specific place, the worship place, that he has promised that his presence will be there if it's done in the right way.
Like where 2
or 3 are gathered in your name.
There am I among you.
Yeah.
I think part of that too is when we think about the way a pagan worships, is that they think that a very mystical and magical about the special object or a special place, as if there's something in that. I think part of what God is indicating here is that, it's good to remember places and their importance, but those things are not what is providing your blessing. And so God will come in every place he will come and bless, that he's not limited to a specific place for that. It's going to, I think, can point forward to the scattering. I think it's going to point to the portability of the tabernacle. I think that a recognition that God is going to be with them because they are his people marked by his name.
And of course, I think it's subtly referencing what is to come through Christ, that he is coming to us, and he will, and all the nations of the world will be blessed, of the earth will be blessed through Christ. It's not explicitly said there with the promise of
the promise
coming
of blessing,
but the promise of the blessing is there, and so
blessing and multiplication of.
Yeah.
So that phrase, in every place, is in every the place, and it comes after verse 24 that talks about sacrifices. And in every the place, I'm not really I don't think ultimately going against what you just said about worship not having to be centralized. But what I think does need to be centralized is something about the sacrifice having happened that makes it worship. Not that we're doing it the same methods as they are, because we don't need to because of Jesus. But our sacrifice, and this We are Protestants. We are not Catholics. We do not do the Mass. We do not sacrifice Jesus because he already was. Right. But we do worship because of that sacrifice. And as a result of that sacrifice having happened. So there is a sense of, even in the text, sacrifice has to be there for worship. And in every, the place might be some sort of like where this happens.
And wherever that sacrifice,
that
altar.
Yeah, and I think that doesn't contradict what, at least the intention of what I was trying to say.
Right.
And what I was trying to say is that the pagans would worship by saying it needs to be right here. It has to be right here.
In this particular way.
In this particular place, because this place is a special place because it holds some sort of magical power here.
Right.
And so, yes, there's a real sense at which this Mount Sinai was a very special place, but they would continue to move beyond that, and that they would then set up, again, a place of worship.
And it's a place where they learned there has to be a mediator, which obviously doesn't ultimately mean the place is the thing. Let's talk about 25 and 6 real quick and then get to some quick application because we are nearing the end. If you make an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones. We've kind of alluded to this already.
Right.
For if you wield your tool on it, you profane it, meaning use the stuff of earth, an altar of earth. Use the stones as they are, that remind you of my being creator. What does verse 26 mean about all that weirdness with nakedness?
Yeah, Bob, why nakedness?
Well, in that day and time, when they would go up those steps, there was a lot of nakedness going on.
Well, because they all wore robes or something like that.
That was part of it. They all wore robes, and so God was saying, "Hey, don't. It needs to be modest. It needs to be moral." And so He's talking to them as His people, that they don't fall into that sin of seeing that immorality. But there's a second meaning to it, because it's a criticism of the pagan worship that went on as those steps leading up to the altar. On the top of those pyramid structures, there was a lot of immorality that was going on, and a lot of sexual immorality that was going on in the name of worship for those gods.
As their sacrifice.
As their sacrifice.
Right.
And when God is saying, if you're going to sacrifice for me, we're not going to be doing all this other craziness that's going on around you.
Yeah.
We're going to do it the way I want it done. And it's going to be moral. It's going to be decent. It's going to be one that points to my holiness. Right.
So God's going to bring blessing. One of the things that the pagans seek is a blessing, we'll just say, of fertility in that. And a lot of those rituals were very centered in that.
Right.
And so God provides the blessing, but not that way.
Right. And that they don't have to seek that. They don't have to seek that, those theatrics that went on there.
Like an incantation or a certain method or a certain
those
place.
fertility dances and things.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't have to seek that.
We try and capture a lot with the word fertility.
Right.
Yeah.
Wink, wink.
Transitioning from that into practical application, and then pray us out. Give us a stab at what this means for us.
Well, I'm
in like 25 seconds.
Let's do this quick. I do think there's a application that we need to learn today, that God has provided a way for us to come to Him, and you hear all this. There's many ways to God, but He said, "I will come to you and I will bless you. My name will be remembered." This is how you get to me, and we know it's through Jesus Christ.
Like on His terms.
On His terms, not in our terms and what we think is worship or coming to God or satisfying Him. It's through how He has set those terms, through His Son. As He took on that wrath and took on all that punishment upon Himself on the cross. And so that in itself is probably the briefest
and I think that
application I could find.
This is the first, right after the giving of the law, that God saying, here's what you should do, is that you should worship me first, have no idols, then what does that look like practically? And we're doing that even today, right? So we're saying, what are these commandments? And then what does that look like practically in the way I live my life? This is the beginning of God helping them to make those connections.
Yep.
Sounds good. Lord, help us do those things and worship correctly. Amen.
Amen.